Good evening. Hope you're all well. Today we're learning Maseches Chullin, Daf Kuf Aleph, and we're starting two lines from the bottom of Kuf Amid Beis. Says the Gemara Gufa. We had seen this quoted earlier, and we're going to be digging into the lumdus of it today, right at the bottom of Kuf Amid Beis. What does the Gemara say? Ha'ochel ged hanoshe shel behema tmeya. You can already see the mingling of halachic issues. The ged hanoshe in a vacuum is usher, and eating a behema tmeya is usher. So we'll use the example we were using on Shabbos. You are eating the leg of an animal that is a camel, and you're eating the back leg, which has the gid anosha. So what's the halacha? Do you incur an isser for each of those isurim, for the fact that you ate the gid anosha and the fact that the animal is a behemoth tmeya? This is subject to a machlokas tanoim. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda mechayev shtaim. Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion that you're chayev two things. Number one, you ate the gid anosha. Number two, you ate from a behemoth tmeya. And Reb Shimon poter, which is extremely shocking. Rav Shimon says you're completely potter. Now, even before we read the next few words, which is, hey, we don't understand this, like try and wrap your head around that. You ate the back leg of a camel, or I should say more accurately, you ate the gid hanashe of the back leg of a camel, and you got no korban chatas for your shogeg. Very difficult to understand. So it says the Gemara on the top of Kuf Aleph Amud Aleph, Reb Shimon Manavshach. Reb Shimon, one way or the other, we need to say that there is an element of chiyuv. If you want to say that there is isser chalal isser, which was, of course, the subject of the Gemara that we learned last night, yesterday afternoon, so then we should have multiple isur. And ein isser chalal isser. And if you want to say that there is no category of isser chalal isser, that's fine. But lechai mishum tuma dekadim. Chola pachos, you're eating the gid anosh of a camel. We have kol hayotzi min tame. You're going to eat the gid anosh and have no isser. And v'i ein begidin menos ein tam. And if you want to say, well, don't worry about the isser tuma, about the isser of the tamei animal, because this has no flavor. Again, just by comparison, I'm eating the tooth of a camel. If I swallow the tooth of a camel, that's a nothing. It's I'm making this up. Ein b'shinayim b'nos ein tam. Same thing is true. Even if you want to say that, but lechai mishum gid, at the end of the day, you still ate the wrong gid. You ate the gid anashe b'manashach. How can Reb Shimon say you're pater if you eat the gid anoshe of an animal that is tmei? So the Gemara says on Kuf Aleph Amud Aleph, 5 lines down, Hamar Rava, 2 layers. Le'olam kasavar ein begidim menos ein tam. We get rid of one isser, which is the isser of eating a behemoth tmeya, by saying that when there's no flavor to the gidin, you're not having any benefit from that animal at all. Really, it's not a food. Really, that's what's happening here. They have no time at all. It's not really a food. So therefore, the isser of eating from a behemoth tmeya is not problematic. All right, what about the gid anosha part? Now we get into a whole new world of dialogue. The shiny hasa, the case of eating the gid anosha of a behemoth tmeya is different than eating the gid anosha of a behemoth tehora. The Amar Kra, the pasuk says in Bereshis Lamed Beis, Al ken lo yochel bnei Yisrael es gid anosha, that the bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, are not allowed to eat the gid anosha. Says the Gemara, what's the drush on the pasuk of Bereshis Lamed Beis? Misha gido aser ubsaro mutter. When do we say that there is an isser of gid anoshe? That's only when it applies to something that the Bnei Yisrael are allowed to eat. So that means the isser of gid anoshe applies only where the flesh of the animal is mutter. Yatisazu shegido aser ubsaro aser. However, if the basar of the animal is going to be aser, so then there is no isser of gid anoshe. So we basically have a perfect alignment of the stars according to Reb Shimon. Number one, he holds ein begidim benos ein tam. So if you eat the gid anoshe of a camel alone with no flesh, you're not doing well. You're not being a good Jew. But it's hard to say you violated an isser because ein begidim benos ein tam, and you ate the whole gid anoshe of a camel, but it had no flavor. Okay, so you skirted the isser of eating a behemoth tmeya. And as it relates to gid anoshe itself, there is no isser of gid anoshe unless it's with basar mutter. The only time we have gid anoshe is with a kosher animal. So that's the end of that Gemara, that little gufa that we had, that we started with, of a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that we stack Isurim, that we have Isser Chalal Isser, and the Shita of Reb Shimon that you're putter because Ein Megidim Enosa and Tam, coupled with the fact that Gidanasha only applies by an animal that's kosher. Good. All of that is by a behema tmeya. Let's switch gears. It says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Marav, Ha'ochel Gidanasha shel nevela. Let's talk about a slightly different case. The animal's kosher, but it's just an avela. So says the Gemara, what's the din there? Rav Meir Mechayev Shtayim. Sounds like he's in the Rabbi Yehuda camp, right? He's saying, hey, we're stacking Isurim Isser Chalal Isser. V'chachamim omrim eino chayev ela achas. However, unlike the previous case where one ate the gid anosha of a behemoth tmeya, here where one ate the gid anosha of a nevela, the Chachamim do have one place where they agree. Umodim Chachamim the Reb Meir, third of the way down, Kufal from an Aleph. The Chachamim who say you're only chayav one, you're only going to be chayav one iser and not two. Where do they agree to Reb Meir who holds your chayav two? That's be'ochel gid anosha shel olev shel shor haniskal shel chayav shtayim. In these cases of more severe isurim, these animals have either killed or they were a part of revia, some type of serious isser. So only in those cases do we allow for isser chalal isser. Normally we don't, but here we do allow it. Uman hai tana de be'isser kolel. Who is it that says, and we'll discuss what isser kolel means in a minute. Who is it that says that when it comes to isser kolel, that isser chalal isser lesle, in general, there is no isser chalal isser, but isser kolel be isser chamor isle. So this, you have to pay attention here. There's some dakus here. There's some very thinness and very, very subtle. What did the Chachamim hold? The Chachamim held eino chayev ela achas, because they held that there is no isser chalal isser. B'derech klal, the Chachamim hold that there is no isser chalal isser. However, there's an exception. Where we have isser kolel, where we have a broad isser, so let's say the broad isser in this case is nevela. Gid anosha is very specific, very narrow. Nevela is very broad. Nevela is every fiber of the animal, basically. And gid anosha is only one particular gid, one particular nerve. So the Gemara over here says that who is the shita that holds in general that there's no isser chalal isser, but we do say that there's isser kolel when it comes to an isser chamor such as ola or shor haniskal. Amar Rava Rabbi Yossi Haglilihi. So really, if you look back up a few lines and it says Rav Meir holds X and the Chachamim hold Y, those Chachamim are really Rabbi Yossi Haglili. They hold the same exact thing. What is the source of Rabbi Yossi Haglili's din? So the Gemara says a Mishnah that we've all learned already in Maseches Zvachim. The Mishnah says Ditnan. Tameh, if a man became Tameh, and as we know, the halacha is that a man who's Tameh is aser from eating kodshim. So a man who is Tameh she'achal kodesh, he eats hektish, that's not good. Bein kodesh Tameh, bein kodesh tahor. Whether or not the food that was hektish was Tameh or tahor, that doesn't matter. You're going to be chayev because you're Tameh, and a person who's Tameh is not allowed to eat kodshim. Whether or not that kodshim was tameh or tahor is an irrelevant feature. We just don't allow you to eat kodshim if you're tameh. Look at what Rabbi Yossi holds. Rabbi Yossi Haglili Omer, tameh she'achal es tahor is chayev. No. You can't stack isurim. When do we say that you're going to be tameh if you eat hektish, that you're going to be chayev for eating hektish if you're tameh? That's only true if the food that you're eating is tahor. You're damaging the food you touch. Ki'ilu. So if I'm tameh mace, which I am, if I'm tameh mace and I reach out and I grab some hektish, so if the hektish that I grabbed was tahor, says Rabbi Yossi Haglili, then I'm going to be chayev for the iser of eating hektish betuma. However, tameh she'achal es hatameh, but a tameh person who eats hektish, that's already tameh for other reasons, pater. Shelo ochal ela davar tameh. I didn't ruin the hektish. The hektish was ruined. Now, there's a presumption in here. The presumption in here is that the problem of a Tomei person eating hektish is that he ruined the food. That's what Rabbi Yossi Aglili seems to imply. So Amru Lo, the Chachamim say back to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, I'm not sure I understand. Av Tomei she'achal es hatohor, kevan shenaga bo tima'uhu. What was Rabbi Yossi Aglili's distinction? Rabbi Yossi Aglili's distinction was that if a person who is tameh eats hektish, that if the hektish is tahor, then you're chayiv. If the hektish is tameh, it's already tameh. You're none the worse. So no problem at all. But let me use this as an example. Let's say that the Dr. Pepper that I'm holding was hektish. It was meat, it's hektish. And I am a tameh person, and this is tahor. If I reach out and touch it, what did I just do to the meat? I made it tameh. So say the Chachamim back to Rabbi Yossi Aglili. I don't understand your sheet. Rabbi Yossi Aglili, you want to say that if a person who's tameh eats hektish that's tahor, he's going to be chayiv. Why would he be chayiv? The second he touches it, it becomes tameh. I'm tameh meis. The second I touch tahor food, it becomes tameh. And if I then eat it, then I'm a tameh person eating tameh food, which should be mutter, or putter, I should say. So how can it be that Rabbi Yossi Haglili holds this way? And the Gemara says, Shapir ka'amri le rabban and the Rabbi Yossi Haglili. That's a great question. That's a great question. In other words, again, just one last time, and then we'll go to the response. The Gemara is concerned about the opinion of Rabbi Yossi Haglili. Is that Rabbi Yossi Haglili wanted to distinguish that a person who is tameh, who eats hektish, if the hektish that he eats is tahor, then he's chayev for the violation of a tameh person eating hektish. But if the hektish he eats is tameh, then he's not. You can't make it any worse than it is. And the Chachamim said, what in the world are you talking about? If you're tameh and you touch tahor food, you make it tameh. And then when you eat it, you should not be chayev for eating food when you're betuma, because at the end of the day, the food you're eating is now tameh. You are metameh it. But nevertheless, you should still not be chayiv. You should be pater. So says the Gemara, 2/3 of the way down. V'amar Rava, benitma haguf ve'achar kach nitma basar. If I, who was to eat the food, became tameh meis before the food became tameh, kule alma lo pligi dechayev. Everyone agrees that if what kicked in first was me having a tameh status, everyone agrees in that case that I'd be chayev, the iser kares kadim, because the iser kares capacity of me as a person who's tameh kicked in before anything happened with the hektish. And therefore, we don't care if it is hektish tahor or hektish tameh. At the end of the day, I am chayev kares, and everyone agrees to that. Kipligi, where do we see a distinction between the Chachamim, who say that it doesn't matter what the status is of the hektish, and Rabbi Yossi Haglili, who says that it does matter whether or not the hektish was tameh or tahor? Kipligi benitma basar first, the achar kach nitma haguf. In the case where I became tameh meis at 2 p.m., and then I went over to the hektish and touched it at 3 p.m., and at 2 p.m. the hektish was tahor, everyone agrees I'm chayav kares. However, if the basar became tameh at 2 p.m. and I only became tameh at 3 p.m., that is subject to the machlokas tanaim of the Mishnah and Zvachim Kuvav and Aleph. And let's paint the picture of both shitas. 10 lines from the bottom. Rabbanan, according to the Tanakama, Islahu Isser Kolel, they agree that there is a case of Isser Kolel. And since I was anyways going to be tameh, since the food was anyways going to be tameh, so therefore, demigu demechayev achatichos tehoros, because I would have been chayev for eating pieces that were tahor, the alma, regular pieces, mechayev nami achatichot tmei. It doesn't matter. The iser kolel was that the food became tameh. The timing of when I became tameh has no bearing. The Isser Kolel is this broad Isser of, or broad status of the food being tameh. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. And therefore, they hold that way. For Rabbi Yossi Haglili, who is less le Isser Kolel, According to Rabbi Yossi HaGalili, who doesn't look at Isser Kolel, he doesn't believe in Isser Chalal Isser, to Migu Lo Amrina. He doesn't say the Migu that we just said. So this is the painted picture of their machlokes, and we use Rava's answer in order to explain the Shita of Rabbi Yossi HaGalili. That's fine. The Gemara says 6 lines, 5 lines from the bottom of the page on Kuf Aleph Amud Aleph. Hold on one second. For Rabbi Yossi HaGalili, Nehi de Isser Kolel Lesle Be'Isser Kal. I agree, like we saw above in the name of Rabbi Yossi HaGalili, or I should say more accurately, like we saw earlier in the name of the Chachamim, that the Chachamim hold that there's no Isser Kolel with a low-level Isser, but Yavo Isser Chamor and Yachol al Isser Kal. But there should be, in this case, Isser Kolel or Isser Chalal Isser. Why? Because we have an Isser Chamor in this case. Umay nihu tumas haguf. If the Isser Kolel is that the food became tameh, the hektish became tameh, we should allow, in this case, even according to the Chachamim, even according to Rabbi Yossi HaGalili, a stacking of Isurim. Number one is that the food might well be Tameh, but number two is that I'm Tameh. We should allow for that. Why? Sharei Tumas HaGuf Bekares, because that is a Chamor Isser, because a person who is Tameh, who eats Hektish, is Chayiv Kares, that's a big deal. Why don't we say, in this case, according to Rabbi Yossi HaGalili, who holds of Isser kolel when there's an Isser Chamor, such as eating hektish when I'm tamei meis, why doesn't that apply here? So the Gemara explains as follows. Amar Rav Ashi, man leimalan de tumas haguf chamura. Mehecha Tesi, says the Gemara. What a brilliant argument the Gemara says. Who says that eating food while I'm tamei, eating hektish while I'm tamei, is a big deal? I mean, it's the punishment is huge, but mehechatesi, it's a big deal. Dilma tumas basar chamura. Maybe the fact that the hektish became tameh is worse. Why? Because it's unfixable. The less lay tara b'mikvah. So says the Gemara, pushing back on the Havamim of the Gemara. You wanted to say that Rabbi Yossi HaGalili should be of the opinion that if there is in fact Isser Kolel when the meat becomes tameh, well, we should have added in the Isser Chamor of me being Tameh. Says the Gemara, if I'm Tameh, I can fix myself. I can go to the mikvah. I can do whatever I need to do. You know what can't get fixed? The animal that became Tameh. There is no rectification for that. Now, what we have to do is bifurcate the onesh from the maisa, because kares is the worst punishment we can get. So what we need to do is say, and this is hard for us to do, is that sometimes while the punishment is extreme, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily more chamor than another isser, because in this case, I, who would be chayiv kares for eating this particular food, I can fix myself, but the meat can't. So the Gemara therefore explains why the Shita Rabbi Yossi HaGalili is inflexible in this case. And as we turn to the top of Kuf Aleph Amud Beis, and we'll be learning in Yirtzeh Hashem to Tanu Rabbanan 6 lines from the bottom, the Gemara says, wait 1 second. You're trying to tell me that the Chachamim that we learned about in the Brisa, a third of the way down in Rav Meir, is the same as Rabbi Yossi HaGalili, and that Rabbi Yossi HaGalili doesn't hold of Isser Kolel? That can't be. On the top line, the Gemara says, Rabbi Yossi HaGalili lesle Isser Kolel. I'll prove to you that Rabbi Yossi HaGalili does hold of Isser Kolel. After all, v'hatanya, we have a Tosefta from Maseches Krisus. Of course, Krisus speaks about the Isser Kares, and we know that the Isser Kares applies in a host of scenarios. Let's say we had a scenario of Shabbos v'Yom HaKippurim. It happened to be that Shabbos and Yom Kippur fall out on the same day. One of the most unique halachos of Shabbos and Yom Kippur is this seeming dissolving of Kiddush on Friday night, which is a mitzvah d'oraisa. How do you get around that? The Zachar v'Shamor, right? We know that it's a mitzvah d'oraisa. In fact, even for women to say Kiddush for men, it's mutter, and they have the same exact chiv, because iskish Zachar v'Shamor the Zachar, the women have the same obligation. So the poskim speak about saying by chulu and shul, if you should have the kavana, whatever the case may be. Fine. Let's say it's Shabbos v'Yom HaKippurim. Shagang ve'asa malacha. and I forgot it was both Shabbos and Yom Kippur. I'm not having a good day, and I don't realize what day of the week it is, and it's Shabbos and Yom Kippur, and I did a malacha b'shogeg. Minayin shechayev al ze be'atzmo ve'al ze be'atzmo. How do I know that I have stacked two isurim, exactly what we thought Rabbi Yossi Aglili didn't hold? Says the Gemara, Talmud Lomar Shabbos he and Yom Kippurim hu. Look who the author is, David Rabbi Yossi Aglili. You wanted to tell me that Rabbi Yossi Aglili does not hold a Isser Kolel. No, not true. How do I know? Because of the Tosefta and Krisus. Because the Tosefta and Krisus says in his name that if you have stacked days of Shabbos and Yom Kippurim that overlap on the same day, the 10th of Tishrei is a Shabbos, which happens. So then, if I do Malacha B'Shogeg, why would I be chayiv too? Must be, Elamai, it must be that Rabbi Yossi Aglili holds a Visser Kola. And Rabbi Akiva Omer Eino chayiv alacha. So this is our question on the Gemara. The presentation of the Gemara on Kuf Aleph Amud Aleph is that when we were presented the case of eating the Gid Hanosha of the Nevela, that Rav Meir and the Chachamim argued, and the Chachamim was painted in a way that it was Rabbi Yossi Haglili, which means that Rabbi Yossi Haglili can't hold a Visser Kolel. Yet we see from the Tosefta that he does. So says the Gemara, Shalach Ravin Mishum de Reb Yossi Reb Chanina Kachatza Shel Mishnah ve'epuch. In short, what we do is we look at the Tosefta and say, crossed wires. In the Tosefta, when it says that it's both Shabbos and Yom Kippur, and a person does Malacha B'Shogeg and you're Chayiv too, flip the Shitas. Rabbi Akiva is the one who holds that you're Chayiv Shtayim, and Rabbi Yossi Aglili is the one who holds that you're Chayiv Achas. That solves the problem. Otherwise, this Mishnah, this Tosefta from Krisos would ruin this beautiful edifice that we've built over the last Amud, which is that Rabbi Yossi Aglili, who is the Chachamim, holds that Isser Kolel doesn't apply. And the Tosefta seems to have painted Rabbi Yossi Aglili that way. Kamash Malan ve'epuch. Says the Gemara 8-9 lines down on Kuf Aleph Amud Beis. Shalach Rav Yitzchak bar Yaakov bar Giuri mishum de Rabbi Yochanan. L'divrei Rabbi Yossi Haglili, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yossi Haglili. Wait, which one? The one from the Tosefta or the Epuch? Lemai de Apchan, according to the flipped Shita of Rabbi Yossi Haglili. Shagag b'Shabbos v'hezid b'Yom Kippurim. Let's say you forgot it was Shabbos, but you intentionally did a malacha on Yom Kippur. So the halacha is you're going to be chayiv. What about the reverse? Hazid b'Shabbos v'shagag b'Yom Kippurim pater. Let's say I knew it was Shabbos, but I forgot it was Yom Kippur. I'd be pater for the Yom Kippur. Now, obviously, you're only chayiv a chatas for a shogeg, right? So I won't be chayiv anything for Shabbos because that was done b'mezid, and we learned about that as a drasha from Psukim in some Masechta that we learned. I can't remember where. So what does a Rabbi Yossi Aglili hold? That if it's Hazid b'Shabbos v'Shagag b'Yom Kippurim, the halacha is pater. Even if you knew it was Yom Kippur. Even if you knew it was Shabbos, but you forgot it was Yom Kippur, you're not going to be chayav achatas for what you did on Yom Kippur. Why not? My taima, says the Gemara. Amar Abaye, a weird answer. Shabbos kviya v'kaima. Shabbos is always fixed. Shabbos is always the same. Yom Kippurim beidina the kakabayla lay. The day of Yom Kippur is different because the day of Yom Kippur is a day that is established by the Chachamim, and that is not able to generate a chatos. What a fascinating thing! But by the way, it puts into question everything because every time you do anything wrong on any yontif, which is established by Kviya Diyarcha, how does this work? The Gemara doesn't like this. The Gemara says, Amar le Rava sov tarvayu ba'ade adade kasu. At the end of the day, Shabbos and Yom Kippur are the same. You still should be chayiv. So the Gemara gives a very sad answer, but one that has happened in our past many times. And the Gemara says 1/3 of the way down, Amar Rava shmada hava. It was a time of shmad, a time of persecution. And look at this unbelievable piece of Gemara. The shalchu mitam, they sent out a psak. The yoma de kippure de hai shata shabsahu. That year, in a year of shmad, Yom Kippur was pushed off to Shabbos. Why? Because if they saw that we weren't going to work on a Tuesday, they'd say, well, we're giving you Shabbos. Well, you think you get another day off of work. It's Shmad season. Now, the Rishonim here point out that that's not actually the case in regards to the tinus, right? You still have to fast on the 10th. But they didn't want there to be a case of ishtakach where they would forget. That's what Rashi here says. V'shalchu mitam Yom Kippurim da'idna shabsahu. This is Rashi 6-7 lines from the bottom. Also Yom Kippurim b'Shabbos. Afal pi she'enochal lios bo kidei afal pi she'enochal lios bo kidei shelo tishtakach Toras Yom Kippurim. They didn't want people to forget Yom Kippur. Ve'oivim lo yavinu bo mishum debechol Shabbos nami lo abdi malacha. Unbelievable, unbelievable. So this particular year was what the Gemara was discussing. V'chein back in the Gemara. V'chein ki asa Ravin v'chol nechusei. Everyone who came with him amru ki Rava. Everyone said like Rava that this Gemara that we're trying to understand according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili was talking about a year of Shmad, where they kind of activated Yom Kippur on a Shabbos. Again, I don't know what all the technical components were. Like, did they do malacha that year? Was it like Mechalelin Shabbos Achas they Shishmu Shabbos Harbe? Like, what did they do, Taka? Did they actually violate? It's not clear. I don't know what the details are, but they certainly had this mindset of lo tishtakach Torah miYisrael, lo tishtakach Yom Kippurim, and they had Yom Kippur on Shabbos that year. That brings us to the two dots halfway down on Kuf Aleph Amud Beis. Amar Rabbi Yehuda v'halomi bnei Yaakov. We know that the Gid Anosha was from the story of Yaakov. So it says the Gemara Tanya. We have a brisa. Amru lo the Rabbi Yehuda. The Chachamim in the Tosefta said back to Rabbi Yehuda, "V'chinemar al kain lo yochlu bnei Yaakov." No, it doesn't. The Isser didn't start by the times of Yaakov. V'halo lo nemar ela bnei Yisrael. That's what the pasuk says. V'lo niku bnei Yisrael ad Sinai. When were the Jews called Yisrael? Yaakov was called Yisrael already by the Sarah Shel Esav. But when were the Jews called Bnei Yisrael? Not at that time, but rather by Har Sinai. So therefore, Ela b'Sinai Nemar. It must be that the Isser of Gid Anosha only applied by Har Sinai. Ela shenichtav b'Mekomo. But when the Torah was written, the story of Yaakov and Sarah Shel Esav was written that way. Leida me'ezatam me'asar, just to give you the time of the Dekra. But no, there is no Havamina like Rabbi Yehuda wanted to say that the Yisr of Gid Anosha applies to Tamei animals also. It's not. It doesn't seem to be the case. Says the Gemara. Just a few more lines for tonight. Masiv Rava. Rava asks. The pasuk says in Bereshis Mem Vayisu b'nei Yisrael es Yaakov avihem. Oh, look at the words. Even in the times of Yaakov, how are the Jews referred to? As Yisrael. And if the Jews were referred to as Yisrael, that then implies that the Isra of Gid Anosha started even before Matan Torah, which then revives this possibility of Shitas Rabbi Yehuda. So says the Gemara La'achar Maisa, that the Jews were called Bnei Yisrael well after the story of Yaakov and Sarah Shel Esav, not the same time frame. Says the Gemara, Omar le Ravacha braid the Rava le Ravashi. Me'ahi shaita litzar. Fine. Okay, let's say it happened 30 years later. I think I heard in the shiur it was 30 years later. Let's say that this happened. So fine. So Gid Anosha needs to start 30 years after the story of Yaakov and Sarah Shel Esav. Whenever you start calling Bnei Yisrael, and not Bnei Yaakov, then we have the Isra of Gid Anosha. Omar le no. V'chitora pamim nidna. No, you don't have some halachos starting by 30 years after Yaakov and Sarah Shel Esav fought, and then again hundreds of years later at Har Sinai. No, that's not how it happens. Ha'ushaita lav shas ma'isa havoy v'lav shas matan Torah havoy. That's not correct. That's not how we look at things. So the Chachamim push back stark, and they say that the way that we look at the timing of the implementation of Gid Anosha is that it only happened at Har Sinai. Mir Hashem, tomorrow night we'll pick up a Tanu Rabbanon, 6 lines from the bottom of Kuf Aleph Amud Beis. Wishing you all a beautiful night.